Welcome to a lecture on the static keyword. So today we're going to be taking a look at the static keyword, static variables, and static methods. So first we're going to understand the concept of a static keyword, and then we're going to see how it applies to variables, and then how it applies to methods. So let's start off by taking a look at the static keyword. There's really not much to it. The static keyword may seem the most difficult concept or keyword to grasp just because you're not familiar with it. You're more familiar with public and private because those are some common words in your daily life, but the static keyword is actually another simple keyword. So the static keyword is something, its primary purpose is for memory management. And as we look at static variables and we look at static methods, we're going to see why. And we'll be going over static methods in more detail later in the course, but we're going to just take a little glimpse at them so we have a general idea. And then as we look at the static variables and methods, we'll be able to see how they improve memory management. So let's look at static variables, and another name for static variables is class variables. So let's take a look at the example in the bottom of the slide, which says public class student. So if you remember, we're declaring a class, and we can tell that because of the class keyword. And then then from the public keyword, we know that it's accessible to all. And the name of the class is student. So the only statement inside of this class, which obviously there'll be a lot more on the bottom, such as a main method and everything, but the important statement is static string college name equals, in quotations, FSU semicolon. So if I were to remove this static keyword, the program would still function. So the thing with this, in this situation, the static keyword is definitely not necessary. And as you can see, the static keyword is being used to define the string variable college name. So that's why we can say that the college name variable is a static variable, which is also known as a class variable. So let's look. So we have a class about students, and it seems that the students are from the college FSU, which stands for Florida State University, and it seems that all the students are from there. So now the reason we're using the static keyword is because every single student, so when we have a class and we have so many students, we'll be creating different objects for every single student. Because let's say that this student class is kind of like the blueprint for a college student at FSU, and then we're going to be creating objects or students that go to FSU, and each student is not exactly the same. So that's why we have this blueprint, and then when we create an object out of it, or a student, will be modifying it. So we know that all the students who are going to be created from this class will go to the college FSU, or Florida State University. Now what would happen was, if let's say we had 500 students, so every time we created a class, we'd have to reallocate a new variable or take up some memory to store the variable FSU, or the variable college name with the value of FSU. So every single object of the student class would have to store the variable, string variable college name, and set it to a value of FSU. Now, that would take a long time, and as you can tell, that would take a lot of processing speed, and that would probably slow down the speed of the program. So that's where the static keyword comes in. So what the static keyword does is, it essentially makes the variable college name a common property of all objects. So what the static keyword does is that every time an object is created, memory is not allocated for this new variable. The static keyword basically prevents that memory allocation from happening multiple times. It simply lets the computer know that it's going to stay standard for all the objects, so all the objects don't individually save this, and it's just saved once, and then all the objects know that FSU is the college name. So this will help us save a lot of space, and that's what makes the static keyword memory efficient. And by doing this helps increase the speed of the program because there's less memory that needs to be stored and quicker speed. So again, the static variable is not necessary in this situation, but it's still being used to improve the speed and the memory efficiency of this program. So next, let's take a look at static methods. So similarly to static variables, static methods are known as class methods. So what does this mean? This means that you don't need to create an instance of a class in order to run these methods. So basically you don't need to create an object to run the method. So as I'll show you later in the course, if you define a method as static, you can run it without creating an object. But if you don't define a method as static, you have to run it when you create an object. And that's exactly why the main method is static, so that we can run the main method even when we haven't created an object from the class. Now I understand that creating objects is still a little bit down the road, but just to understand, from whenever we create an object, we can invoke different methods, as we went over earlier, and we can invoke different methods, and those methods need not be static because we're invoking them using objects. But if you want to invoke a method from within a class, such as the main method, which we've been doing, we've had classes and we haven't been creating objects of them, but we've still been running the main method. So in that case, that's why the main method has the static keyword in it. Because what that does is that tells the computer that there's no need to create an instance of the class or an object in order to run this method. And that's the entire point of a static method. We'll be going over the static method in a lot more depth later in the course. And one thing about static method is they don't modify the instance variables. So the instance variables, as you can tell, are part of the instance of a class or the object. And since there's no need to create an object, they won't be modifying the instance variables as well. And as I said, this seems a lot very abstract, but we'll go into great detail later in the course.